Good morning. Another Saturday morning in Anaheim Clinic of the Anti-Fragility Health. Thank you for joining wherever you are. Right, Karen and Luke in Utah having fun. Selena and team in Vietnam watching. Also, I think Kathy and team in San Francisco watching, and some other people in Baltimore and across the US and in Asia and Africa. Thank you for joining us. We also have a couple of people here in the clinic itself. As we continue to manage and understand COVID-19 and the stresses around it, we always have our board to check on and just make sure that we keep you up to date. Not to scare you or to stress you, because our work here in the clinic is to actually build your immune system and manage your stress. Incidentally, today we're going to talk about emotional well-being. And at the center of your emotional well-being are two critical things that we'll be talking about: stress and sleep. So let's talk about that, and we're going to start. For people who are joining, we've provided some of the material online, so you can download online and get the material we'll be using today. There's a lot to cover, so be patient. We're going to walk through some of the really challenging issues that cover the space of emotional well-being. So let's start with that. Grace, can you help me give this to the people in the room? All right, so let's look at emotional well-being. At the core of our emotional well-being is stress. The Cleveland Clinic, which is one of the big clinics in America, defines the body's reaction to any change that requires an adjustment or response. The body reacts to these changes with physical, mental, and emotional responses. But very interestingly, one of my big teachers, Stephen R. Covey, who's dead, talks about stress and emotional well-being in this way. There's stimulus and there's response. So if you notice, there is a space between stimulus and response. And we have lots of stimulus, and we call those stimulus the stressors, right? The things that create that stimulus to which our body has to respond. So it's very important we understand that. And so when we call them stressors, because really most of them cause stress to our system, right? And so we're going to talk about some of those issues and begin to understand. So stress is like a stimulus to which the body has to build response. So let's walk through and look at what this sheet talks about, the physiological effects of stress. And we're going to go deep into stress, because stress is actually a good thing. It was designed to be a good thing. It is just the way our lifestyles and habits have developed that stress has come to have a bad name. So stress is a good thing because we need to be responsive in the environment that we live, whether it is from rain. When it's raining, we respond. When the sun is shining, we respond. When the wind is blowing, we respond. When an insect bites us, we respond, right? All are stressors, and our architecture was built for appropriate response. But we're going to explore when that response architecture is not working as determined, and that is when it becomes a real challenge. You're going to find from the literature also they say stress is the silent killer. It is really the real big issue that a lot of us have in the modern life that is actually killing us slowly, and you're going to see the impacts of that. We normally relate negative events. Most people look at stimulus and they think of it as negative. But don't forget that a lot of stressors are also positive and some are negative. For example, when you get married, when you have a baby, those are good stresses, right? And when your boyfriend dumps you, in some cases that's a good stress because you say goodbye to bad rubbish. But you know, it could also be a negative stress. So we always need to look at stress in terms of the response and understand that stress can have positive and negative connotations. Very important as we explore this. So on that first sheet, let's just look at what we call getting married, having a baby, buying a house. Though perceived as positive events, are all stresses that the body needs to adapt to, right? The minute you buy the new house, even though it's exciting, now you start stressing about furnishing the house. The choice of blinds, right, all of those things. So let's look at the physiological effects of stress. On the brain, it causes poor sleep, increased risk of stroke, increased risk of depression. On the joints, swelling, pain, tight muscles. On the heart, increased blood pressure, increased cholesterol, increased risk of heart disease. On the skin, acne, eczema, psoriasis. On the GI system, the gastrointestinal system, ulcers, poor absorption, leaky gut. Reproduction, low testosterone, estrogen imbalance, reduced fertility. It's really challenging that this whole system actually impacts our whole system that significantly. And as you can see on the graph on the right-hand side, it shows you the normal cortisol range. Cortisol is the hormone that's released, one of the hormones that's released when we're stressed. When that stimulus comes in, hormones are released, and one of them is cortisol. The other one is epinephrine, which is actually adrenaline, another name for adrenaline. And these are triggers that are gonna trigger the response mechanism. And so if you look at that graph, when we wake up in the morning, the act of waking up itself, there's a release of cortisol. It's almost like to start our engines, right? Cortisol starts rising before we actually wake up. And so if you look at that graph shows you the cortisol. If you look at the black lines, the black dots, right? It shows you the black line is the lower level, the blue line is the upper level, and the green line is where it should track. So if you see the black dots there, it's showing that this person has a normal cortisol response. It's very important to understand that. When we run your urine test here with Dutch Plus, where we are looking at what we call the cortisol awakening response, I'm going to be talking about that a lot today. That's a very, very important measure to see how you are managing stress and whether you are hyper or lower or just in normal. And then you look at people who are burnt out, right? Like somebody like Pauline who's studying very hard and stressed about going to medical school. Her cortisol, she's always hyper. And so measuring, it will show whether she's hyper or too low or just normal. So it's very, very important. So we're not going to talk about the nutrient recommendations. We're going to move to the next sheet where we're going to explore. I'm going to need you here near me. And so this is the sheet for those online who need to be downloading the material. This was uploaded yesterday, and if it is not, send us messages and we will upload it later on. So what it says here is that these are the different stages of stress, right? And it is just a circle of people just rushing and rushing and rushing. I remember the first time that my grandfather came to visit me in London, one of the shocking observation he made, which I had not observed, was, why is everybody rushing? And I didn't understand it, because if you're if your lifestyle, and you see it in our lifestyles, that you wake up in the morning, you're rushing. At night, we're all like that, knocked out, right? So, and that was his comment, because coming from the village where I'd grown up in the village, even though life is tough, there are actually rest times during the day. We all wake up at 5 a.m. in the morning when the chicken wakes up, because the chicken wakes up everybody, and everybody has to wake up. And so you go feed all the animals, you clean, you collect the eggs, you go carry water, get ready for school. But in the afternoon, everything in the village is calm. People take naps, they rest, and then they go back in the evening to the farm to do some harvest, collect things, and get ready. And by 8 p.m., we're in bed. Very, very calm life. He came to the city and he could see all this nonsense, just rushing. So let's look at the first kind of stress response. Because today we'll be talking about two kinds of stress response. Let's look at the first kind of stress response. It's called acute stress. And acute stress is activated by stressors, and it really is activated by our sympathetic nervous system. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. We'll be looking at some of the HPA axis later on. So a lot of things happen, and then our fight or flight mode is initiated, is activated. And you can see the hormones there, the epinephrine and the norepinephrine that are released. Our heart muscles, our blood rate is activated. We begin to lose concentration, because when we're in acute stress, it's very difficult to make good decisions. That's why managing your response to stress is very, very important. And so in the new teachings around stress is that every time there's a stimulus, you need to pause. Because of that third issue, making decisions in acute stress, you typically make the wrong decisions because you don't have enough capacity and ability in that process. So it's important you take a pause before you respond, right? For example, you notice how people panic. There's a gun shooting in the theater and they start running. They have not even thought, where am I running? Most people don't even know where the exits are, so they start running. Well, what if you run towards the gunman? And so it's very important when you're stressed or there's a stressor, the first thing is to pause, get yourself settled before you respond. It's very important. And then that helps with the concentration before your body is mobilized for action, right? That's why you look at tennis player during training, or all sports people in boxing or whatever. I don't know the punch that my opponent is going to hit. So during training, I have been trained to make sure my response is a proper response, not just an arbitrary response. It's a very important issue. In tennis or in sport, I don't know where the guy is going to go with the ball. So I've been trained to understand how I'm going to respond to each stimulus that's coming towards me, so that you're always orderly, you're organized, and that only comes through training. You have to train yourself not to panic immediately something happens. A snake shows up and you panic, you're going to make the wrong decision, and that's why you end up getting bit by the snake. So it's important that we look at how the hormone affects that response system, and therefore how we can use our mind through training to actually manage our stress response. That's in acute stress. Something happens and we have to respond. Let's look at chronic stress response, which is where the HPA axis, and we'll be talking about details of the HPA axis. You know, people are going to say, how is emotional well-being connected to stress? Stress is really at the core of our emotional response and emotional well-being. And that's why in the literature, the minute we talk about emotional well-being and you're going to look at the questionnaire, very quickly we move into the space of stress. Stress is what really drives our emotional well-being. And when you can't handle stress very well, it's very chaotic and it leads to a lot of illness. So let's just talk now about the chronic stress response. So there are actually two hormones. There is cortisol and DHEA, which are very important hormones that you're going to learn today. Actually, they are the most important that we actually measure also, because one is the sympathetic nervous system. It triggers the sympathetic nervous system, and the other one is the parasympathetic nervous system that brings it down. So if you look at the overall timing of cortisol, it rises in the morning and then begins to fall as it goes down during the day. That circadian rhythm also drives metabolism. And in the evening, when cortisol is low, DHEA rises to calm down and start doing the big important work of repair. And that's why when your immune system is really powerful, if you notice, many people, that's when they really feel the attacks of COVID-19. It's in the night when actually DHEA, the repair system, is actually trying to go on, and that's when it feels like it can attack the body. So stress hormones are released, cortisol and DHEA. The immune system is affected, right, when we are overstressed, and then it leads to poor memory, depression, and the body remains in a persistent state of alert, right? So when we test CAR, which is the cortisol awakening response, that's the meaning of CAR. So it's very important for those who've done the blood test with us called the Dutch test, that you understand these terms. We are looking at the cortisol awakening response. We want to see that spike. If you don't have that spike, we're going to discuss what that means. And then we want to look at the diurnal cortisol, which is the ability for you to actually go to sleep in the evening when that happens, right? So in the evening, if your diurnal cortisol is not at the right level, then it's very difficult for you to go to sleep. And we're going to talk about certain mechanisms that we're going to. So let's look at the 4 key stressors that stress human beings, right? I was talking about the stressors. And what is a stressor? It's the source of stress. And when people think about stress, they think only about the mental and emotional stress. But you know, like they talk about the tip of the iceberg, that's just the tip. The other ones are blood sugar, insomnia, or what we call sleep dysregulation, circadian dysregulation, and then inflammation, which also causes. So those are the 4 key stressors. And now we're going to then go take a deeper look, Grace. We're going to take a deeper look into stress. So all this material, as I already said, is loaded in the Facebook Drive and YouTube. Correct, Mike? So you can follow us there. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but let's just follow that diagram. So when there's stress, there's hormone release immediately. Don't forget that this architecture that God created, it's a biochemical architecture. Everything that drives this architecture is driven by biochemistry. So hormones is what triggers the actions that need to happen. And you will see some of those hormones there on the left-hand side. They're all different hormones, epinephrine, the cortisol, all of those hormones. And then on the right-hand side, you're going to see the physical effects of these hormones, right? So when we look at the fight or flight response, right, that causes problems in itself. So when we are talking about acute, stress, stress is always in 3 parts. And then when we talk about chronic stress, we're going to come back to this diagram so I can explain to you very clearly what's going on and why acute stress is okay, but can be damaging, right? People who put pressure on themselves all the time. Acute stress is a good stress because it protects us, but chronic stress, which is this one, chronic stress, and that's acute stress, the diagrams are different, and we're going to talk to you why they're different and why they cause real big problems, okay? So look at the physiological effects. Blood sugar irregularities, disrupted sleep-wake cycles, suppressed immune system function, decrease in thyroid hormone production, decrease in sex hormone production. All the things that modern life is killing us about. But let's look at the stages of stress so that you can actually understand that diagram. It's very important. The first stage is hypercortisol, right? This is the stage where cortisol is released to prepare us for the response, which is fight or flight. The second stage is where cortisol is dominant, and then the third stage is where there is low cortisol, right? That's typically how it should work. Cortisol rises, cortisol runs everything, and then cortisol is going down. If you notice here, cortisol is produced, cortisol stays continuously, and therefore you cannot go down. And so people are rated in those three different areas, right? People who are typically hypercortisol people, people who are cortisol dominant, and people who are hypercortisol. They have low cortisol, people who have irregular cortisol, and people who just have high stress reaction to everything. So typically, we use this graph to explain where people tend to be. People who are just continuously producing, and then it leads to a lot of other illnesses where the organs that produce these hormones really just get tired producing a lot of the hormones, right? In some language, we call it adrenal fatigue, which is one of the key organs in the HPA axis, the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and the adrenal gland. The adrenal gland is down here, the pituitary and hypothalamus are up here, and the production, they get tired. So some people call it adrenal exhaustion, where you're always stressed, right? It's become the way of life for a lot of people. They just always stress, they just stress. Somebody opens the door, they panic. Somebody, they panic, right? They're just highly strung. And that's really, really challenging for those people. So there are some nutrient recommendations. I'm going to talk about this later. But if you begin to see, let's just look at a high level, we have phosphatidylserine for acute stress. And then for people who have chronic stress, we have licorice or basil. And then for calming support, we have melatonin, taurine, and GABA, which are really the things we recommend to get people to sleep who cannot sleep, especially menopausal women who, because of the other hormonal imbalances, really do not have the sympathetic and the parasympathetic architecture working normally. Because what is normal? By evening, everything should be settling down. You should be stress-free, and then you trigger the diurnal cortisol DHEA architecture, the parasympathetic, that will bring everything down so that you can go to sleep so the body can do its repair functions, right? And there are other supplements here on the side that we recommend. And you know, sometimes patients will say, why are you giving me so many supplements? Well, because your biochemistry is screwed up. And we have to give a lot of things to support it and to try and boost it up. So if you look at the supplements down there, we have magnesium, we have B complex, we have DHEA, we have vitamin D, we have pregnenolone. All these supplements are things that we recommend for a lot of the underlying imbalances that we measure. Once we measure those imbalances, we try and make these recommendations. It's really tough because we can't just have one supplement that has everything in the right amount. Very important that you understand that for people who are always fighting with me about the amount of supplement we are recommending. The first complaint is about money, and then they say it's too much. and the capsule is too big, or I don't like the taste, blah, 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 which is more stress, right? You just create more stress when you should just submit to what Charles Sine says. Just submit because it's right, rather than stress yourself about too many, the price is too much. Well, when they tell you a Louis Vuitton bag is $5,000, you don't complain to the store and say that price is too high. You say, can I have 3 of them, please, in different colors? So stop complaining about the price of our supplements, okay? Let's continue the stress conversation, okay? So now we're looking at stress and the sympathetic nervous system, right? I hope we're clear. We spoke about it. Even when you do our Menla scan, it will also show your stress. And one of the things that Menla scan also does is that it will show your stress plus your fatigue, which are 2 things that it would measure. So let's go through this and look at what's going on here. So the sympathetic nervous system is stimulated by our stress response, what we call the sympaadrenomedullary system, right? This promotes the release of neurotransmitters and all these very complicated things. And so here we're now talking about chronic stress, which leads to a depletion of these neurotransmitters. So let's look at the hormones. We've looked at that already. Remember, now we're looking at the adrenal gland again. And where's the adrenal gland? It's sitting right on top of your kidney. Very important. So when you have fatty liver disease and a lot of accumulation or problems with your kidney, see how connected they are. It tends to also have problems with your adrenal. Okay? So look at all the things that happens there. So let's just go down and look at some of the, sorry, I'll go to the next page again. So let's look at some of the supplements that we then recommend. Look at that inositol. That's a supplement that we've been thinking about recently for a lot of patients. Inositol helps to increase neurotransmitter release from the nerve cell. Very, very important supplement. And so again, all these supplements are things that we want to recommend to deal with a very potent problem that everybody has. Okay? So let's talk about stress and the thyroid. Right, so now we're talking about a lot of different organs, right? We spoke about, I'm going to have a test at the end of this, the hypothalamus, the HPA, the pituitary gland, the adrenal gland, they call it the HPA axis. So whenever we talk about stress, stress drives through those 3 organs that produce a lot of the hormones. The hypothalamus, it's up there with the pituitary. Pituitary, they're close together. Then the adrenal, they send the signal, and that's where the things are released, right? So the other things are produced up in the brain. The CRH and ACTH are produced up in the brain. And then down in the adrenal, it produces the cortisol and the epinephrines. And then down in the thyroid, right, that's where we then have all the thyroid issues that a lot of people have. Look at that. A lot of people have thyroid issues, unexplained weight gain. You're not eating, but you're putting on weight. Cold hands and feet. Fatigue. Fine brittle hair or hair loss. Body temperature below 98.2, which is mine. High cholesterol. History of I don't have that since I'm not a woman. But I have some of those hypothyroid symptoms, right? Even my blood test, and that's why I'm taking a lot of supplements to support that. So let's go and look at the different things that would help with that. Iodine, which I take, tyrosine, iron, zinc, selenium, all of these big supplements that we have spoken about. So now let's do the questionnaire on stress so that you have context as we go through these questionnaires. So before we go through the questionnaire, I want to talk about the diagram first, because the questionnaire is tied to the diagram so that we get clear context. So that's the diagram. We had loaded this on the website before. I don't think we have a recent copy, but the questionnaire goes across the 4 areas of stress that you see on this diagram. So we're going to walk through this very carefully, and then we're going to look at the questionnaire. So I want to start with looking at emotional and perceived stress. Because it's one of the people are most aware of perceived stress, but that's where we have the least understanding of what it is. So if you notice, it's in 2 areas. One of them is the anxiety depression, which is a response. As I said, we have a stimulus, and we have a response. And part of that response, or that stimulus, when the stress comes, part of that response is a hormonal response. But if we go back to the triggers, right, look at the mental and emotional, so there are things there about lack of control. You know, there are some people who like control, who if the countertop in the kitchen is not clean, they're stressed. The trash was not picked up, they're stressed. The laundry, people didn't clean their clothes properly, they're stressed. If I go through some people's all-day life is stressful because everything stresses them. It's very challenging. Look at them, relationships, lack of control, and burnout. People are just, and it is all out of your choice as to how you want to respond. And so we build this formula called expectation and perception. And then we build a formula, what we call the EP gap. So if expectation is higher than perception, if expectation is equal to perception, and if expectation is lower than perception, you begin to see how our stress responses to that really vary. And therefore, in Buddhism, they teach you mostly about expectation being the biggest driver of suffering. That when you have very high expectations, like Endang has of her daughter Pauline, that I want you to be the best daughter ever, to graduate 4.5, even though the highest level is 4.0. I want you to be exceptional. And then after she's finished her MD, PhD, now she has to marry the most rich, good-looking, tall guy you could find. The pressure on that is significant, whether it's explicit or implicit. So let's be very clear about expectations. Some expectations like I have of my children, most of it is implicit. I expect them to live up to a certain standard. And even though I may not voice it, there is pressure that they can sense from that expectation. And so if, like my grandfather said to me when I was 12 years old, we were 60 students in the class, and I came out number 45, and my grandfather looked at me and said, interesting. So the guy who came first, does he have 2 heads? I said, no. Is his father a millionaire? I said, no. Does he eat extra in the canteen? I said, no. Then why is he first and you're not? And for the first time at 12 years old, I thought, that's actually true. Why am I not first? And that was the beginning of me being first in the class. And it raged till today, that there is no excuse for me not to be first. So that's expectation I have of myself. And therefore, that expectation drives my performance. So it's very important, because if you have high expectation, we could call this perception, we could also call it performance. So if you expected to marry a rich guy and the guy turns out to be a poor guy, life is really tough. If you expected to marry a rich guy and the guy is a billionaire, imagine how stressful that is. Now you have to spend all that $1 billion. So when you're ordering your Louis Vuitton now, you have to stress over which colors you're going to buy. Very stressful. Whichever way you look at it just generates a lot of stress. So perceived stress is really very challenging for all of us. And the anxiety depression part is if we don't have enough or too much of those hormones. And that's why we do a hormone replacement therapy. If you don't have enough of those hormones, then it also affects your stress, right? That's why some people have depression and some people have anxiety, right? It's just two extremes of the availability of the hormone. So if you're always angry at home, come in. If you're always angry at home and irritable, it's not because of the person you're with, because you've been with that person for a long time. It's you who's the problem. And it could be that you either have an expectation, perception, or performance gap, or you have a reduction in the amount of hormones. I can see Enda smiling because Enda says, I'm guilty of all of those problems. All right, so let's move to the second. Are there any questions on perceived stress?
Yeah, I have a question. Everyone is different how to respond with the stress, correct?
Yeah, hold on. Very important comment. Yes, everyone is different. Why? Because of those two issues. One is our response is guided by that, and second, by the hormones that we have available. Is that clear? It's very important.
Yes.
So because you could be normal on the hormones, but your expectations are abnormal.
How do we know, like, some people has a stress, but they are very calm and no emotion. How we know that they are stressed?
How do you know they're stressed?
Yeah.
Oh, we measure it in the urine.
Okay.
So for example, I'm that kind of person. I don't show stress. That doesn't mean I'm not stressed. So when I look at Dr. Yan, I look at myself. She's always stressed. I'm not stressed. And part of why I'm not stressed is because of training. I've trained myself not to show stress. And because I was in the military and I was a boxer and I played tennis, when you're in competition, you actually train yourself not to be stressed. Because stress, as I said earlier, when you're stressed, your response is suboptimal. That's why the same thing with exams. That's why you want to do a lot of preparatory tests before the exam so that the exam is normal. Because if not, in the exam, you're not going to do your best.
Okay, another question.
Is that clear?
Yeah.
Okay.
If our hormone is imbalanced, only a supplement or hormone therapy works.
Yeah, you can get it from, well, hormones are actually produced in the body.
Yes.
With cofactors and other things supported with nutrients. But with age, the depletion of those hormones happen. Or, as I spoke before, you have been so stressed that you've killed your adrenal gland and it's just not, it's dead. Or your kidney is just dying because of diabetes. And all the other organs are just aging. So aging in itself causes a depletion, or some people it's genetic. They're born depressed. So we have to give them medication to actually bring them to normal. or they are born with high anxiety, you have to give them medication, right? We run research upstairs on all of that.
Yes. Is that if we take medication, practice meditation, and you know?
No, if you practice meditation, yeah, when you practice meditation, what you're doing is that you're teaching yourself to build a habit to calm yourself down. Because don't forget that in yoga, which is a meditative form, one of the big teachings is breathing. And what breathing does is that breathing really calms down the sympathetic nervous system. So when you take deep breath, that's why when we measure it on the machine, if you breathe too fast, you're kind of a nervous kind of person. If you breathe slower, it allows the body to be more thoughtful in its response. So you could, through meditation, through prayer, through worship, through dance, through exercise, and that's what all of those things do. They calm down the sympathetic nervous system and produces the epinephrine and norepinephrine. The things that make you feel good are produced when you dance, you exercise, and do those things.
Yes, but not necessarily improve other unbalanced hormone, correct?
No, well, you cannot use those the means to, because, for example, if you exercise, it's a short uplift, right? You have to have the nutrients, you have to have the meditation, you have to have the supplements. So it's a combination of all of that, and all of us are very different. You know, some of us are just born hyper, and therefore we always have to calm ourselves down, and we need to learn how to do that. And some of us are born just too calm, and we need to up ourselves up. And some of us are born normal, like me.
Okay, well, I have
No, yeah, this is a very important topic. Go ahead.
Okay, which one more accurate? Blood test hormone or melaskin? Because they for the stem
All
cell-
three are critical because we do not know. So this is the challenge about measurement and diagnostics. We really don't know how to measure biologically what the body is doing. So we are sending probes, right? That's what we're probing. We are looking at blood. And what is blood? It's what's circulating in the bloodstream. It's not what is inside the cell. Because it is inside the cell that we are getting these reactions. It's a cellular activity. But we're looking at the blood. And the blood will give us part of the story. Then we look at the urine, which is what we're excreting. And what's excretion? Excretion is what is already too much in the blood that's being excreted, right? So that's why excretion tells us that if you're stressed and you're producing these hormones that are excreted and they're not at the right level, it means you don't have enough, because they need to be at a certain level for us to read the excretion. We can also look at cortisol in saliva. So we look at saliva, we look at urine, and we look at blood. But don't forget, there's nothing about accuracy. We're testing to find out appropriately where that level is. Is that making sense? Grace has a question.
Some people give to stressed others. Some people get the
No, that's a perception. Yes, hold on. No, nobody can give you stress, because the stimulus is separate from the response. They're not connected. So if I slap you, you could be stressed, or you could say, I'm used to being slapped. Do you see the point? They teach you also in the Bible. Depends on your response. You cannot say that person caused me stress. No, nothing caused you stress. Even if a snake shows up here now, why are you stressed? Because of your response. You choose to be afraid of the snake. The snake didn't do anything to you. Or a cockroach or a rabbit, they didn't do anything to you. You choose to panic. That's your choice. It has nothing to do with the cockroach. Is that making sense? Because a lot of people think that I am stressed because you make me stressed. No. You chose as your response to be stressed. It's very important because if in boxing, that's one of the things they do. And that's why you jab. You jab to piss the person off so they make a mistake. You understand? One of the things they teach you in boxing is that ignore the jab. Stay in your game. Stay with your game. Stay with the plan. Don't get upset because the person keeps jabbing you. They're confusing you. And so you're going to make a mistake. You understand? That is the key point in any sports. I want you to make a mistake and I win. You make a mistake and every time you are stressed, you're going to make a mistake, then I win. You see the point? So that's why even in anger management, they teach you, if you're fighting with your spouse and the argument is not going anywhere, you need to quit, stop, and exit. Because in the top of the argument, nobody wins. You just destroy each other. You understand? It's very, very important that you learn that. No. They should, No, you didn't conclude. You didn't conclude. They should seek what? Counseling?
Yeah.
All right, yeah, counseling. We go to counseling. Why? Hold on. We go to counseling because we don't have the rational architecture for our response. Because every person, every time they say something, your response is emotional. So there's no rational architecture for managing the response. Because when two people are fighting, who's right? It's an emotional response. And the only place we can make progress is around a rational architecture. In the emotional space, you're going to be validated. You hurt me. Not really. You are the one who is responding as if you've been hurt. It's a very important teaching, right? Your mother dies. You are the one who chooses to be crying all the time. Because what is death? Death is a rational outcome. We all know now we're going to die, right? So what is different? It is how we perceive that death that makes us emotional. Death is death.
But emotional actually is a good thing.
No, it's not.
What?
I just showed you what happens with stress. When you're very emotional, being emotional at a balanced level is okay, but when you're very emotional, you cannot be rational. It destroys your ability for rational thinking. You're going to make a lot of silly decisions. You understand? So in the emotional space is a very dangerous space to be. The rational space is a much better space to be because you make good decisions. Is that clear? And that's why I said, if a snake showed up in this room, right, the first thing you want to do is to say, how do I move away from it and how can we kill it? So just running and leaving the snake there, if it's a dangerous snake, doesn't solve the problem. Because until we kill that snake, you're not going to feel safe around here. So that's a rational issue. But you cannot tell me that you're being afraid of the snake is justified. What is it justified? No, it's not. Because the snake has not bitten you yet. Right? And we don't even know whether the snake is interested in biting you. Do you see the point? We don't know that. And we don't know whether the cockroach is going to kill you. Do you see the point? So this is a very tough issue because stress is really at the core of the biggest challenges that we have in life. Okay? Any other questions before we move to circadian? Thank you. Just pull the door. Thank you. Drive safe. All right, let's look at the next area of stress. I'm going to go down to what we call glycemic dysregulation. So did we cover perceived stress appropriately? Pauline, you had any questions?
Yeah, you mentioned the mental and emotional about lack of control. Then how do we respond to that?
Well, that's what I was teaching you here.
The formula.
I was teaching you the formula. So what can you change in the formula? You can change all three. You can change your performance. Like I have an expectation that you're going to do the MDA PhD. That is an expectation I have of you, Pauline. To make sure E equals P, you can lift off your performance. And that reduces the stress. Do you see the point? If my expectation equals your performance, then the stress is resolved. You see the point? There's no stress because you have resolved the anxiety. So there's no emotion, and that's why I work really hard. So I don't let myself down, because any day I don't work hard at moving this company forward, I let myself down, and that causes me stress. And so I don't allow any distractions from that, because I know the formula. This is the formula for mental and emotional stress.
Really hard to manage.
Well, but you have to develop the capacity. We all have the capacity to do that, right? Why do you think some tennis players stay number one for 10 years? Because they understand that, right? Listen to Federer talk. He's 36 years old. He's still number 2, 3 player in the world at 36. 18-year-olds cannot beat him. Why? He understands that he expects to be the top player in the world, and therefore his training is at a different level to keep that level of expectation equaling performance, right? That is the core issue. A lot of people have high expectation, but they're lazy, and then they cry because of this, right? I failed. Emotion has no value in life. It's valueless. It's wasted energy.
Respond.
Yeah, it's a wasted response. It has no value. Crying, isn't that what they teach you as a kid? Crying doesn't bring your mommy. Crying doesn't pay your rent. Crying doesn't... Yeah, but then people are like, oh, I feel so sorry for you. If you really feel sorry, write a check. Then I'll know you really feel sorry. Like my friends on Facebook with compassion. Compassion has no value. Compassion doesn't pay the rent. Do you understand? So people use all this language that is useless, that doesn't really help anybody. I support Black Lives Matter. Where is your check to help black people progress in America, rather than protesting, I support Black Lives Matter? It's useless. Do you understand? If you have compassion, we need to see the action matching your performance, right? If you want a fair society, you have an expectation for a fair society, then you need to perform to build that fair society. Does that make sense? If not, it's just big, stupid talk. So look at Facebook. They want a digital community. They build Facebook. Amazon wanted to be the dominant retailer. He built Amazon. He didn't stand talking and complaining about Walmart. He built a solution. Is that clear? Because a lot of weak people spend their whole time living in the land of expectation and poor performance. And then they cry. God gave us all the capacities and capabilities. What you should spend your time in the vine doing is trying to produce, right? Remember where God gave somebody 5 talents and somebody gave, and they all went, and some went and used their talent to produce, and some hid their talents. You've been given the talent. Go create value out of those talents and stop using silly, weak language like compassion and this and that. Compassion doesn't help homeless people. Does it? Does compassion feed homeless people? I've never seen compassion generate food or rent. Are we clear? Because a lot of people are locked in that emotional land, thinking that emotions has real validity. Yes, I understand love, desire, and those things, but if you don't live in the rational space, those things can be very destructive and very stressful. Are we clear about this? It's a very important issue, because a lot of people then say Charles is an asshole, and that's why I live in the rational space. Right? Isn't that true, Pauline? When we walk through your resume and all the things, you have to stay in the rational space. And you always have to say, Pauline, like we were writing the recommendation, what are the expectations? What are other people looking for? What should I be doing? How well should I write this? Right? You need to remove emotion. Nobody's interested in you crying.
After crying, some heart a little bit release. After fighting my husband, that's not crying.
No, there's no release. It's bullshit. There's no release. It's you feeling good and sorry about yourself. Nobody cares. The key issue is looking at where the argument is and what is the source of it. Because don't forget, in most relationships, the argument is repetitive. We don't make progress. You don't love me. Most times that cry is because there is no love that's going to be enough for you. You don't appreciate people enough. Because even if they give you this little love, it should be enough for you. You want big love? How big should the love be? Like the whole ocean, the whole universe? It still will not be enough. Because why? You have low self-esteem issues. You have self-insecurity issues. The love is never going to heal you because until you grow yourself, right? And that healing from that low self-esteem comes from self-actualization, right? You come into your own. The day Pauline graduates MD, PhD, you see Pauline will be strutting like, I am the shit, because she has performed. Do you understand? And there'll be people crying on the street, I didn't go to university because my mother didn't love me. Get over that shit and go achieve and self-actualize. Then you overcome all the emotional bullshit. It's really very important. Yes, not everybody is going to love the same. So your expectation of love, if the perception and the performance is not there, what should happen? Lower the expectation. What is love? It's just a perception. That's all it is. There's no real measurement. So how much love do you want? Pauline wants a big love. Enda wants huge, massive love. Grace wants infinite love. All of them could be the size of a pear, right? So it's very important that, and I know we've taken a lot more time on this space, because really that's the space where we are really in control. I know we're in control of all the others. Let's now talk about glycemic dysregulation. So when you eat a low fiber meal, when you eat high glycemic index meal, what's a high glycemic index meal? A meal that has a lot of sugar. So when you eat, when you have developed insulin resistance, last time we spoke about insulin resistance, right? When you have just too much sugar in the system, and then the pancreas, the islets of Langerhans that produce insulin, they are tired, they are overworked, because insulin is the hormone that binds to glucose to take it out of the bloodstream, right? So when you have those things, it now develops glycemic dysregulation, including obesity. So let's look at, like me, I have some fat here. When you have obesity, when you have insulin resistance, when you eat high glycemic meals, a lot of carbohydrates, and you eat low fiber, you have glycemic dysregulation. And that causes stress in the body. So you love sugar, you will die with sugar, right? And is that clear? The triggers of glycemic dysregulation: obesity, insulin resistance, high glycemic index meals, and low fiber. That's why when we try to put you on the right path, you lose weight, less sugar, less carbohydrates, high fiber, lots of vegetables, right? That reduces your sugar dysregulation. Is that clear? Let's go to the next one. Inflammatory signals. look at the things that cause inflammation. We know there are big things that cause inflammation. Infections, bacteria, viruses, all of those things in the gut will cause inflammation. And if the inflammation is chronic, then it leads to a lot of these illnesses, and these triggers are the things that will keep causing inflammatory signals. And what do inflammatory signals lead to? They lead to a lot of illnesses that continue to increase those signals. For example, when you have pain, pain is an inflammatory signal that we have a problem. And if pain is consistent, then the signals are continuous. Do you get that? So if you're always in pain in your neck, in your shoulder, in your hip, and that pain is continuous, then the signal is always there. And that signal causes stress, right? For example, because I hurt my arm, I sleep on my hand. And because I hurt my arm, when I sleep on this arm, I have to wake up because I can't sleep on it all night like I used to do. So I have to turn on this side, right? So that's stress in itself. That's why the body cannot rest, because that shoulder is injured because of the pain signal that the body is receiving. Very important, right? That's what causes stress. Let's go to the big one, sleep, the circadian dysregulation and insomnia, which is really the big measurement we also measure, because we take, when you cannot sleep at night, we take your saliva and we can measure the dysregulation issues. So let's look at it. So when you have sleep apnea, it's part of the sleep issues, and you have pain and you drink coffee, then you're going to have sleep issues, right? Especially if you drink coffee in the afternoon or late at night, right? So any coffee you're going to drink should be in the morning so that the body has the time to digest it. Afternoon and evening coffee is part of the reasons why you will have sleep issues. Then let's look at the other things that will cause sleep issues, what we call the light-dark disruption. Because our circadian dysregulation is driven by the fact that we should be sleeping when the sun is down, and we should be awake when the sun is up. And so things like shift work, jet lag, or daylight savings actually cause us light-dark issues, which causes circadian disruption. Now we've covered the 4 areas that drive stress. Very, very important teaching in everybody's life. This is almost at the core of life, stress. And if you don't get a handle on it, then you're going to suffer seriously from the consequences. So before we do the questionnaire, are there any questions on stress? You have the questionnaire, right? You were given the questionnaire. So let's go. Do you have this questionnaire? All right. So let's go to the questionnaire. So you can see very quickly that rather than them calling the glycemic dysregulation, they're calling it the blood sugar imbalance, right? Do you experience symptoms of hypoglycemia, such as dizziness, shakiness, brain fog following between meals? You know, I'm not one of those people who really get hungry that I'm shaking. Some people get so hungry they're shaking, and that's hypoglycemia, right? They're actually shaking from hunger. And I remember my ex-wife, when we first met, when she's hungry, she would cry out of hunger. You see, Enda has a good heart, and I'll be saying, what is the problem? Nobody died from hunger, missing one meal, right? Very rational response. Do you frequently miss or delay meals? Right, that's not a good thing, because the blood sugar, as I said again, let's look at that. The blood sugar should be between 70 to 90. So if you miss meals, your blood sugar is going to fall below 70. And that's what hypoglycemia is. So you need to make sure that your sugar is in between 70 and 90. Is that making sense? If not, you will suffer from hypo or hyper. Hyper or hypoglycemia. Too much sugar and not enough sugar in the blood. So sugar has to be within that range. The body needs it for everything that it does, right? So not eating any carbohydrate is not a good thing. So even on a ketogenic diet, they can put you on that diet for a couple of days or a couple of weeks, but you need to go back eating sugar, because when you are in a ketogenic diet, we're going to burn the fat for energy, but the body still needs sugar. Sugar is critical for body function. So you cannot say you're not going to have any carbohydrate at all. That's not healthy. The body needs sugar, but it needs it minimally at that. And God was very smart. He put sugar in almost everything. Every fruit, every vegetable has sugar. So God was smart because he was building a biology that should cope with what he had created on earth. Okay? Do you consume excessive sugar or carbohydrates? Are you diabetic or pre-diabetic? They say in 2025, more than 100 million Americans will have diabetes. Do you regularly consume alcohol or caffeine? I do. I drink soju a lot, almost once a day or twice a week. Do you consume food within 2 hours before bedtime? Right, very important question we've discussed here. So there is an issue of time-regulated feeding, TRF, time-regulated feeding. So you need to feed between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. when the light is on. And therefore, if you're going to bed around 9 p.m., you've given about 3 hours before you go to bed for digestion. So it's very important. That's why they ask that question.
Sometimes empty stomach, I can sleep well.
Then you drink water. If you drink water, you'd sleep. The body, you can deceive the body by drinking water. It's very important, guys. Okay? Now let's look at mental and emotional stress. Do you frequently experience anxiety? Those are the people with hypercortisol. Do you frequently experience anxiety? Right? Do you suffer from depression? Do you suffer from mood swings? Do you have difficulty getting motivated? I don't suffer from depression. I don't have mood swings. I don't have anxiety. I don't have any difficulty getting motivated. Do you frequently experience feeling of agitation, anger, fear, or worry? I don't have any of those. Do you consider your job, relationships, finances, stressors in your daily life? I don't feel that. Are you a caregiver for a parent or disabled child? I'm not. So when you look at that space of mental and emotional stress, you can score yourself very clearly. So it's very important. Let's look at sleep cycle disturbances. Are you experiencing problems falling asleep? Right? I can barely keep my eyes open once I get to bed. I will watch my drama for like 20, 30 minutes and then I'm gone. Like last night, even though I took a nap also in the afternoon, by 9:30, 9 p.m. I was asleep. Are you experiencing difficulty staying asleep? That's the big one. Many people fall asleep, but they cannot stay asleep. I wake up once or twice to go pee, but the minute I come back to bed, I'm asleep. Are you sleeping for 7 to 9 hours each night? Do you feel well rested when you wake up in the morning? Yeah, when I wake up in the morning, even by the time I wake up around 4 a.m. or 5 a.m., my head is already designing new architectures. So I know I'm rested because I can lie there for an hour and my brain is running. Do you work second or third shift or keep late night hours? You know, a lot of people don't go to bed early, and I don't understand why. It's like, why are you staying up late? Just because the white man discovered electricity doesn't mean you should stay up late, right? You should lower your charge. Pauline, take notice. No late night. You put your light off and go to bed. And you don't need your computer in your room or your phone in your room, right? You're not a doctor. There's no 911 emergency that you have to respond to. So when you leave all those things in the living room, it gives you a sense of relief to really relax. So it's very important that we understand that, okay? Do you block blue light from your eyes at least 2 hours before you go to bed, right? I know we are all on our computers and our phone all the time. Do you eat within 2 hours of bedtime? Do you frequently feel drowsy throughout the day? Do you snore? I think I snore, and sometimes during the day I feel drowsy. I start yawning. That's my sign to say I'm drowsy, and I take True Adapt. I'm going to talk about some of the products now. And True Adapt then wakes me up because my hormonal production system is, and it could be because I'm stressed from other things, so my cortisol levels have dropped, and so I feel tired, right? And it could be because the stress of a meeting, my glycemic dysregulation or my inflammation signal, something is stressing me, so it lowers my cortisol level to a level, or just my overall production from the adrenal is weak, and therefore I feel fatigue in the afternoons. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. How we describe whether we have stress or depressed? Anxiety.
Yeah, so look at the diagram again. The other side of anxiety is depression. You should know the difference. I'm going to wait for them to take out your needle and then we talk about this. Okay, I'm going to come back to the topic. All right, so let's continue. We'll come back to that big question about anxiety and depression. So inflammatory imbalances or chronic pain, right? So let's look at the different sources of the inflammatory signals, right? The first source is musculoskeletal, and that's to do about pain, headaches, muscle, back, or joint pain. The second one is gastrointestinal, IBS, Crohn's disease, or diverticulitis. The third one is skin pain, dermatological, where we have hives, enzymes, eczema, or psoriasis. The fourth one is lung, respiratory, asthma, bronchitis, right? All the infections have to do with the air passage and the lung, right? The fifth one has to do with autoimmune. And what's autoimmune? Where the body is trying to attack itself, right? Because it looks at the body as a foreign agent and it's trying to overcompensate. And that's what happens with autoimmune illnesses that are triggered by. And then there's immunological, which is our immune system, creating inflammatory, where we have food allergies, chronic infections, or frequent illnesses. So your responses to this is going to help you understand this architecture. We have the four stressors: sleep, emotion, sugar, inflammation. Those are the four stimuli or stressors. And then our body has to respond. The one that we are more in control of in our mind is the emotion. The sugar, diet, inflammation, detox, and the things we do, sleep, we have a lot of hormonal support for that. So there are actions you can take on each of the stressors to actually reduce stress overall and therefore have some very important outcomes. So now let's take the question again. The question was, what's the difference between anxiety and depression?
Depression and stress.
No, depression is a kind of stress. Anxiety is a kind of stress. Okay, so let's go back to the picture. Yes, Pauline, you were going to say something.
Yeah, what is the difference between anxiety and excitement? Do not just
Well, it's a very, well, anxiety could be an acute response. No, sorry, what was the other one?
excitement.
Excitement could be an acute response, which is good. Anxiety is a chronic response. You're anxious, you're in a state of anxiety. It doesn't come and go away. Right? They score, go! We are excited. Then it goes back. But anxiety, am I going to pass the exam? Do you see the point? And all of them are hormonal driven, right? Hold on. So we see the neurotransmitters and we look at the neurosteroids. Don't forget, with excitement, it doesn't really last that long. Look at it. Even when people have a baby, the day the baby comes, the next day you have to start taking care of the baby. The excitement is gone. It's now anxiety steps in. Oh my God, do we know how to feed the baby? What are we going to do? Before it was, oh, we love the baby. Now the baby is here. Oh my God, what do we do with the baby? Do you see how it changes from excitement to anxiety very quickly? Because of our coping mechanisms. And it's all driving different hormones, right? Because now that we have the baby that we really wanted, now we are afraid we might not be able to keep the baby. Do you see the point? It's like you buy your Louis Vuitton bag, you're excited, now you're worried, oh my God, they might steal my Louis Vuitton bag. It's like we create drama for ourselves, right? In that formula.
But it's never ending. It's always something.
No, it can end if you give all of that up and go live in the village. That's what a lot of people do. Come on, the blue zones. We have taught that the people who cure cancer, they give it all up and move to the village where Louis Vuitton bags have no value. Yeah, and then every day you go to the mountain, you drink good water, you breathe fresh air, and you become healthy. Then your apartment is not important anymore. Your car, your glasses, your handbag, looking good. Looking good is not important because in the village, nobody care about you looking good. So let's talk about a couple of these supplements. So we have True Adapt, which is our stress recovery, right? When you're very stressed, brings you down. Then this is stress reduction formula, which brings you up. If you're like Grace on Saturday afternoon, very lazy, doesn't want to do anything, so you bring that up. Right? So we have a Dopa Boost. You saw it behind the sheets. We have Adrenal Oil for people who have adrenal issues, where it's just adrenal fatigue, the cortisol production. So this supports the adrenal gland. We have this GABA, melatonin for sleep, right? Very important because it helps just trigger the parasympathetic and calms the body down. With DHEA. We have DHEA here somewhere. So we have melatonin, and then we have, this is the myosedate, and there's also magnesium. So we have all these products on our website to support, so that's DHEA. And what's DHEA again? It's the opposite of cortisol, right? It helps the body. That's the dual response, the cortisol, DHEA support system. Cortisol triggers our stress response to fight and flight. DHEA calms down our stress response so that the resources can be used for repairing and clearing out all the damages in the system. So staying in the calm state is more healthy than staying in the stress state. So our sympathetic nervous system was supposed to be there to respond to attack and for our defense. If we stay in that state all the time, we get sick. When we stay in a very calm state, that's very healthy. Is that making sense? So most of us run out of DHEA as we grow older. So when we run the urine test, we can see the cortisol, we can see the DHEA. You know, today I didn't talk about the sex hormones, but they are critical, but they contribute to stress. But we wanted to focus today just on the stress, right? Because when you have sex also, it's like exercise, it brings down your stress. But that means you have to have sex all the time, then your stress will just go away. So that's why when you're with your spouse, you're encouraged to have sex twice a day. That's what I'm recommending. Then your stress will just disappear, okay? Then now you have all these women who are smiling all day. Oh, I am so excited about life. I have no stress. I don't need a Louis Vuitton bag because I'm so happy. Thank you very much for joining. Were there any questions online, Mike? Thank you very much for another beautiful Saturday where we have walked through the maze of stress. And thank you for all the questions that came up. It is the biggest and most important area about our health, especially people who have everything. Now stress comes the killer. You know, you have the big car, the big house, the children, the husband, the friends, the clothes, and yet you're stressed. And then people in the village will say, why can't you be happy? That's the point. Ask yourself, why can I not be happy? It's because I have too much high expectations. I want my children to be president. Thank you very much for joining us today.